Much of this goes back to some historical stuff we've been learning over the last few months in our Wednesday night Bible study. If you've been there, you're going to recognize it. Laban had 2 daughters, and the name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. And Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. Laban responded and he said, it is better that I give her to thee than I should give her to another man. Abide with me. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days because of his love for her. Verse 22, Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast, and it came to pass in that evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah the maid for a handmaid. And it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said unto Laban, this is Jacob speaking, he said unto Laban, what is this that thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve thee for Rachel? Wherefore then thou hast beguiled me. You may be seated. I want to take just a few minutes and I want to make a statement that you have heard from your children many, many times. Those of you that have raised more than a single child family have most likely heard the saying, when kids get into squabble and there's disagreements about things, one of them is going to ultimately make the statement that says, it's not fair. How many parents have heard that? It's not fair. Can I tell you this morning that there are some times in life when life just is not fair. In fact, one of the statements that was made one time was talking about Americans that are disappointed. And one of the things that disappoint Americans, believe it or not, is putting money in a Coke machine and not receiving anything out. I worked for my quarters. I took them to the machine, I put them in, and I expected something in return, and I got nothing. Not only did I lose my money, but I didn't get the product that I wanted. It's just not fair. Yep. But on a more serious note, we've got to understand that sometimes life is just not fair. Things will happen, circumstances will arise, cars will break, things will become due. There'll be things in our life when people will come against us, where they'll disagree with us, where they'll try to use us or misuse us. And without any reason at all, we can become in an attitude and a mindset that says, what did I do? Yep. Why is this here? Yep. What is this all about? It's just not fair. Ecclesiastes 9 and 11, it says, I returned and I saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, and the battle is not to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor riches to the men of understanding, and yet favor the men of skill, but time and chance happen to all things. I know sometimes we like to attach great biblical prophecies to everything that happens in our life. Sometimes life just happens. Sometimes it's not God's will that the wheel fell off of our car. Someone just didn't tighten the lugs. Sometimes we may attribute that to everything there's a meaning and there's a purpose for everything. But there are times when things just break. And there are times when people just break and they misuse us and they work against us. Let me take you for a minute to an introduction to Jacob's past. And if you've been here on Wednesday nights, you've also been very much a part of that. But understand that from his very pre-existence, as he was in the womb of his mother, about to be born, prophecy went forth. And someone said, within your womb, there are 2 nations that are struggling against each other. Through their birth we see that process, and through their naming we see that process. You see that Esau was described as a hairy individual, a hunter, a very different type of man than his brother Jacob. Jacob was tagged as the supplanter. The supplanter. Supplanter is one that takes the place of another without the right to do so. Takes the place of another without the position that he could do that correctly, yet it happened. How many times could we see that brother in his life that said, wait a minute, I was supposed to get this blessing and you've slipped in and taken it from me. Wait a minute, I was supposed to be first in line, but you've slipped in and taken it. And all throughout the process, we see this continually coming up again and again and again. Yeah. The difference in these two men were phenomenal. They were as different as light and dark. They were 180 degrees separated from one another in their drives, in their desires, in everything about them, and in the deception that was within this man, Jacob, and the thing that drove him. Deception is always ugly. In fact, Brother Sargent kind of alluded to some of it this morning in the Bible lesson, and the spirits that drive those type of things. Deception has its roots in ungodliness. Deception is for self-gain. It's about me. I'm going to achieve. I'm going to grasp. I'm going to get what I want. And if I have to deceive, if I have to misstate something, if I have to lead people in a certain direction to get what I want, that's what I'm going to. That's what deception is all about. And ultimately, deception has its very roots and stems from the father of lies. Deception. Yet we see this man that was filled with deception. At some point, the old saying is, what goes around comes around. And later on, we see his life where he is willing to serve for the beautiful love of his life. He's willing to give everything for that one that he was so excited about. The Bible describes the intensity of his love and his attraction to Rachel. It said, but just a few days, and it seemed like just a few days, although it was 7 years. Because he was so excited about getting that one. But isn't it interesting that deception came back to him in the most powerful and mind-boggling way? Where he was deceived into receiving not the love of his life, but the sister. Deception. Sometimes life's just not fair. Sometimes stuff comes and we have to struggle with it. Now the deceiver has been deceived. But wait a minute. Our stories seem to always focus on Jacob. And although this was a young man that God's hand evidently was on in a powerful way. And even through some of the things that happened in his life, God's orchestration seemed to be there again and again and again. And we focus on Jacob, but let me focus your attention for just a minute about a young lady of innocence. About a young girl that wasn't dealt the beauty card. About the one that was most likely always in the background as her sister was around her and got so much of the attention from the guys because she was beautiful. The Bible said that Leah was not so. And so she worked through these things in her life, and evidently it was a lifelong story. But when we look at her, it got even worse because then her father used her as a pawn. Yep. She became an object of trading. It wasn't about a young man that came and rescued her, a Prince Charming that would sweep her off her feet and then live happily ever after. She was deceptively put into a place where she would be despised. Right. Life sometimes is not fair. She watched as her sister made the wedding plans, was excited about everything that was about to happen. We saw the future plans in her sister's eyes and the excitement that was there and the joy as the family rejoiced and made party plans and wedding plans. We see the twinkle in Jacob's eye, and she saw it whenever he would see Rachel. She was not an object of love, but she was a wife that Jacob despised. Life just wasn't fair. She should have had better. She deserved better. What had she done to be treated so cruelly? Have you ever been in a position where you've made that statement and just said, this is not fair? I've served God for years. I've sought after His will in my life. And now this has happened. I don't understand why I am where I am right now. I don't understand what this is all about. You see, that young lady in all right should have had happiness and fulfillment, yet she was being used, and she was a casualty of circumstances. Leah spent a great part of her life trying to right the wrong that had been done because her spirit had been wounded. Wounded spirits. I found over the years that a lot of people deal with wounded spirits. And they can be crippling, or they can be victoriously overcome. They can work to the demise of the spirituality of that person if they're nurtured and taken care of, or if they've overcome. Those people can become great soul winners and prayer warriors for the Lord. Spirits that have been wounded. I've seen also that through the years, strong-willed children can be a delicate balance. As I've watched families deal with strong-willed children or a child, it takes a firm hand of very godly direction to help them. Ignoring their issues is absolutely not a problem, yet in our world, so many times it goes to the opposite side of the fence, and those children are abused and they're worked against, and a dictatorship attitude comes over that I'm going to make you do what I want you to do, and they end up being wounded. My wife and I had the opportunity to work with several teenage girls at Tupelo that had wounded spirits. And the battle is very tough. Wounded spirits in our society come and show their faces as abused children, as damaged relationships, as unaddressed marital problems, as drug abuse, as alcohol abuse, as drug misabuse, medicine misabuse, church problems, unresolved issues, teenagers, problem adults, depressed, oppressed, suppressed, sickness, disability. Sometimes we just got to wonder, God, why? Right now, why have I gone through this? Why have I dealt with this sickness? Why has this come upon me? Why, God, am I in this place right now? It's not supposed to be this way. Life is just not fair. But let me turn your attention very quickly to 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 12. Because I want to take you to a young lady who could have by all rights have said, this is not fair. She could have very easily said, my spirit has been wounded and I'll never recover. Nothing will ever be different. Yet she persevered past that. 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 12. And it came to pass, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli marked her mouth. And Hannah said, she spake in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought that she had been drunken. And Eli said unto her, How long wilt thou be drunken? Put away from thy wine from me. You see, this young lady had come into the house of God, and she was burdened, and she was suppressed, and she had the weight of the world upon her shoulders. She had come to the end of her rope, and out of all people, the priest, the man of God, should have understood. Yet he mismarked her. Yet he misjudged her. Yet he misunderstood, and he corrected her, and he chastised her. And she could have easily said, Wait a minute, I'm at the end of my rope, God. I've come here to seek after you, and now the man of God is against me. It's not fair. It's not fair.
Hallelujah.
The church has a mission to save the lost, to minister to the wounded spirits. And yet, too often, we can become very aggressive with the one, and we can be impotent in the other. It's easy for us to see a lost world that needs Jesus. It's hard sometimes for us to understand that what we're dealing with are wounded spirits that need to be lifted. They need hope. They need direction. They need to understand that they don't have to stay where they have carried these burdens all of their life long. But there's a future and there's a direction that they can go. Several years ago, my wife has told you about the Lord speaking to her about the sick and the wounded that would come into the church and the mission of the church to reach them and to help them. Hannah could have been wounded. Hannah probably, by all rights, should have been wounded.
Yeah.
And she could have carried that hurt with her for the rest of her life. But let me show you the difference in response as Hannah came into the presence of God. First of all, Hannah came into the temple, the presence of God. She came into the house of God barren. The situation was real. It was not something she had imagined. It's not something that was just something that had been extravagant in her mind, but the issue was really there. She came barren. She had no children. She desperately wanted and needed to conceive, and she did not understand. To add injury to insult, the priest scolded her because at that point he missed it. Her soul was wounded to death, and it wasn't fair. Have you ever seen people that has come into God's house barren? My Lord. I'm just gonna get real transparent right now for a moment. There are times when we as a church body sometimes come together and we get very focused and involved on what we're supposed to be doing, upon the worship that we're supposed to be giving, upon the song that we're supposed to be singing, about what's going to happen next in the service. And too many times we can look out over the congregation and there are wounded spirits out there that we miss. We don't, not that we need to know their circumstance or their situations or their history, but we should be able to perceive what's happening there. And we tend to get so involved. I was kind of in the service earlier as we were worshiping, and I thought to myself, sometimes I wish we could just turn the lights out. Where no one could see anything. All we could do was hear. I've been tempted before with praise singers to just have them all turn around backwards like this and sing to the wall. Yep. Or possibly get the congregation, turn around, look to the back. Mm-hmm. Just stand backward in your pew, in your spot. And then we would focus on what we're hearing and the Spirit that's moving rather than what we're seeing.
Yeah. Right.
At times it can be a detriment to us because we get so intense about what we're seeing and we're reacting to what we see or what we think we see, and we miss God moving in the house like He really wants to move. Let me tell you, this is a place where God's Spirit moves. When we come together, it is about Him being in our presence. It's not about how well we do.
No. Hallelujah. Praise God.
Hannah came that day barren and empty, without hope and without a future and without a direction in her life. But she came and she did what she knew to do. Oh, perhaps in a different sense than Hannah. Perhaps there are people that come in and they're running on empty. They don't have anything left. They're living in a world without a purpose. Secondly, I want you to notice that Hannah came into the house of God burdened. As she stepped into that place, 1 Samuel, it says, and she was in bitterness of soul. There was something that was dying within her, and she brought it into the presence of God, and she gave it to Him.
Oh, Jesus.
But thirdly, Hannah came into the house believing. If you will notice the scripture, it said that she prayed from her heart. Her lips moved, but words did not utter forth. Whenever we come into the presence of God and we find that place where everything around us disappears and we become one-on-one with Him, you will see things that will begin to change. Not just in the service, but in your circumstance and in your life. You see, it's not just enough to come to church. It's not just enough to bring our wounded spirit here. But we've got to make sure when we're here, we find a place with Him, that we don't carry that same spirit back out the front doors with us again. We want to be delivered.
That's right.
Hannah came to the house believing. It was between her and God. When was the last time? You don't have to raise a hand. When was the last time that you became so intense in your worship, in service, that it was only between you and Him? My second question is, when was the last time that you felt ultimate change in your relationship with God during a service? You'll find them one and the same. She prayed from her heart. 1 Samuel says that she continued praying, or she was persistent. You know, a lot of times we will see people that will come to the altar and they'll bring their burdens and they'll begin to pour them out. But then they stop somewhere short because there are stipulations. They say, oh, I don't want to go there. I want to get rid of this. But if I have to let go of something, I think I'll just walk out of here with it. My Lord, what a choice. She persisted. And she continued to pray. The old timers like Sister Alice and I would say they prayed through. They prayed through. They stayed.
Right.
They stayed until something changed.
That's right.
It wasn't just, I'm going to pray for a minute until I feel a little better, then I'm going to go out and hope for the best.
Come on.
They prayed through.
Right.
Amen. They touched God.
Right.
She persisted. And then Samuel 1:15, she said that she poured herself out. I have poured out my soul before the Lord. Lamentations speaks of crying out in the night. It says, pour out thy heart like water before the face of God. The fourth thing that she did is she committed. She committed. She said if God will answer her prayers and cause her to conceive, she would go back and give that promise unto the Lord. Many people, many times pray, but they'll only go so far. Don't ask me to give up anything. Don't ask me to speak a word. Don't ask me to make a commitment. Don't ask me to make a promise, because if I make a promise, I have to keep it. If I don't make it, I just don't have to deal with it. And if you don't make it, don't worry, you won't deal with it. Don't worry.
Right.
If you're not serious enough to move in a direction and set your mind and make a promise before the Lord,
Come on.
when you leave here, when the Spirit moves away a little bit and you're on your own, let me just tell you, you're on your own.
Right.
That's right.
And she prevailed. I think this is one of the most telling scriptures in her victory that day, because in 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 18, as she got up from praying, as she had persisted, as she had poured herself out, as she has promised and committed, then Samuel 8 verse 18 says, her countenance no more was sad.
Thank you, Jesus.
Her countenance no more was sad, and the Lord remembered her. She praised God for what she had done. Can I tell you this morning, and I don't know all your circumstances and what each one of us come into the house of God with from time to time, but I can tell you that you don't have to live with a wounded spirit.
That's right.
I understand sometimes there are scars, sometimes there are memories, sometimes there are things that we have to deal with. But I want to tell you today, I want to proclaim to this church that God would have you to be victorious over anything that would oppress you, suppress you, or depress you.
Thank you, Jesus.
I know I could sidetrack right here really big. God does not intend for you to be medicated all of your life
That's right.
because you're dealing with depression.
Right. Amen.
And I know I've just jumped right out there in the middle of the wade pool.
Come on.
But my Lord, if God has us to be victorious and to live in His will and to be what He wants us to be,
Yeah.
Come on.
That's right.
how long will we depend on crutches and not depend on Him?
That's right.
Come on. Preach.
Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He has set me to bind the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captive, and the opening of prisons to those that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all that mourn. He goes on to say, to appoint them that mourn in Zion, to give them beauty for ashes, oil of joy for mourning, and the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. My Lord, there's our first lesson a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
He has promised that there is for us set aside a garment that we can put on where we can praise God, and it will replace the heaviness that we deal with. Do you want to be victorious in God? Let me tell you, it's yours. You want to live in a place where God gives you victory and you're not dealing with all the wounds and the pains from the past. God's got that place for you. He wants us to get up and to stand up and to move on.
That's right. That's right.
God is a healer. He's not an enabler.
Right.
That's right.
Amen.
So if you want victory from a wounded spirit, if you want to overcome that thing that you've dealt with possibly for years and years and years and years, can I first tell you that you need to go to God and you need to find that place where it's more than just now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. You've got to connect with Him.
That's right.
You got to find a place where it's just you and Him and nothing around you really matters anymore. Then you need to be persistent in your prayer and say, God, I'm staying. I'm not going anywhere. I need for you to heal this thing for me, and I'm staying until we do.
Yeah.
Pour yourself out unto the Lord. Prevail.
That's right.
And don't be afraid to commit. Because in your commitment, God knows you're serious.
Yeah.
When you make commitments,